Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Jason had convinced himself that the shadows of his past had finally receded, that the open wounds life had dealt him were no longer festering, only scars whispering of battle survived. Ever since his improbable return to Port Charles, he had poured every ounce of strength into rebuilding from the rubble, not just the physical toll of years lost, but the invisible fracture lines in trust, in friendship, in his sense of belonging. Slowly, deliberately, he reassembled the fragments of his identity as a protector, a brother, a man capable of anchoring others. But all of it, the order, the calm, the silent progress, teetered on the edge of collapse in the span of a single heartbeat at an airport terminal, under the glare of fluorescent lights and the distant hum of departure calls. There, across the crowd, Jason glimpsed a figure that didn't belong in the world of the living. A woman he had grieved for in silence, whose name had carved itself into his bones, Britt. It was no hallucination. Not a ghost summoned from a mind tormented by guilt. This was real. She was real. Flesh, bone, breath, her form unmistakable even under the sterile lights of the terminal. Her stride was different, tighter, guarded, and her gaze never met his fully, only flickered briefly before turning away. But that flicker was enough. In that moment, something within Jason snapped into focus. He wasn't mistaken. The woman the world had buried, the one he had watched fall victim to, the hook, was alive. And she had walked past him like a stranger. Britt's return was as silent as her disappearance, no explanation, no message, no trace left behind. It was as though she'd slipped through a crack in reality to remind Jason that nothing in his life ever stayed dead. Before he could call out, she vanished into the crowd, as if the universe had briefly peeled back time only to mock him with a truth he wasn't ready for. But the true shock hadn't even begun. Because what Jason didn't know, what Britt had buried deep beneath layers of lies, secrecy, and fear, was that she had given birth to his child. Back in late 2021, when their connection was still fresh and fragile, Britt and Jason had shared not just intimacy, but the possibility of something enduring. Jason had comforted her through the early stages of her Huntington's diagnosis, had seen past the thorns to the wounded, brilliant woman beneath. Their brief time together had carried the weight of something powerful, maybe even redemptive. But fate, cruel and unrelenting, had other plans. Jason was presumed dead not long after, buried beneath the debris of a collapsing tunnel after risking his life to save her from Peter. And Britt, already reeling from her illness and the violent world she had tangled with, realized she was pregnant. Faced with a storm of impossible choices, Britt made the unthinkable decision: she faked her death. Too afraid of Carly's wrath, too wary of the Quartermain power games, and too uncertain about her own future with Huntington's lurking in her blood, Britt disappeared. She severed every tie to Port Charles, every anchor to the woman she once was. With the help of a shadowy medical organization once connected to her through Henry Dalton, a geneticist whose ethics were as flexible as his ambition, she went underground. There, in secret and in silence, she gave birth to Jason's child. A boy. The one piece of Jason left that she could protect, even if it meant erasing herself from his world. Britt's return, then, was no accident. It was a ripple from a deeper tide. One stirred by Dalton's increasingly unhinged experiments in cloning, gene editing, and biological weaponization. Britt had once dabbled in genetic science for knowledge. Dalton wielded it for control. And now, Jason's son, unknowingly, might carry a genetic key that many would kill for. As the daughter of Liesel Obrecht and the former protege of forbidden science, Britt knew exactly how dangerous this knowledge was. That's why she could trust no one. Not her mother, not Carly, and certainly not Jason, the man she had loved enough to lie to. Jason, reeling from the surreal encounter, couldn't rest. The more he tried to convince himself he'd imagined it, the more obsessed he became. Britt was alive, he could feel it, and he couldn't shake the suspicion that her return was connected to something larger. He began digging, following breadcrumbs through old contacts, whisper networks, and confidential WSB files. It wasn't long before he heard whispers about a mysterious courier embedded deep in Dalton's network, someone moving between facilities undetected, someone with deep medical knowledge and personal stakes. Every detail screamed Britt. Driven by a gnawing unease, Jason sought out Robert Scorpio and demanded access to the latest WSB intelligence on Dalton. Robert hesitated but ultimately relented. And the file mentioned a female operative tied to the Dalton Lab network, recently seen near the Canadian border. No name, but the description was enough to electrify Jason's nerves. Blonde. Mid-30s. Medical background. Disappeared in 2023. Jason didn't need a name. He knew who she was. In the days that followed, Jason began trailing leads to a rural safe house hidden within the thick forests outside Port Charles. There, under cover of night, he finally found her. Britt. She opened the door before he could knock, her face unreadable, her hands trembling. And behind her, a small child peeked out. A boy. No older than 2. With Jason's eyes. In that suspended moment, nothing else mattered. Not the lies. Not the betrayal. Only the silent admission in Britt's eyes, the breathless apology in her posture. Jason stared at the child, then at her, as the reality crashed down. He was a father. Britt had given him a son and hidden it from him. Out of fear, out of love, out of desperation. But there was no time to grieve the lost years. Because Jason's instincts flared, danger was already closing in. Hours later, an assassin broke into the safe house, a masked figure sent not to capture, but to eliminate. Jason reacted without thought, shielding Britt and the boy, bringing the killer down with brutal efficiency. In the aftermath, as Britt cradled their crying son and Jason bled from a shallow stab wound, they both understood that the past had caught up with them. Their son wasn't just a child, he was a target. And the war that Britt had run from was now at Jason's doorstep. This time, Jason wouldn't run. He wouldn't bury his heart again. He wouldn't lose what was left of Britt or miss the chance to protect the child he never knew he had. With fury burning in his veins and resolve anchoring every breath, Jason vowed that no one, not Dalton, not Sidwell, not even the WSB, would touch his son. He would burn the world to the ground before letting another piece of his soul be stolen again. The protector had returned. But now, he wasn't just fighting as Jason Morgan. He was fighting as a father. At the very moment Jason was struggling to absorb the revelation that he had a son with Britt, another piece of the puzzle was quietly shifting back into place elsewhere in Port Charles. Liesel Albrecht, once presumed to have vanished into obscurity following a string of explosive events tied to WSB investigations, returned with an air of urgency that didn't escape those closest to her. But what stunned everyone wasn't just her sudden reappearance, it was the nature of her first inquiry. Liesel didn't ask about Nina. She didn't ask about Willow, or Sunny, or the wreckage left behind by the recent Corinthos family scandals. Instead, her first and only focus was Rocco. Rocco, the son of Dante and the late Lulu, had recently sent a cryptic and deeply unsettling email to Liesel. It was short, direct, and carried a weight far beyond his years. The message asked simply, "Who is BRT Westbourne, and why does my birth record list her?" For Liesel, the initials alone were enough to send a chill down her spine. Britt Renata Theodora Westbourne, her daughter. A woman the world believed to be dead. A woman she herself had mourned. But somehow, inexplicably, Rocco had found a clue, something buried, redacted, or mistakenly exposed in some obscure file, and now he was asking the one person who might know the truth. The email unraveled Liesel's fragile sense of reality. At first, she tried to rationalize it. A bureaucratic error, a mistaken identity, a child's curiosity distorted by rumors. But the timing was too coincidental, too precise. Britt had disappeared without a trace shortly before the height of Dalton's genetic experimentation scandal, and now, in the shadow of growing whispers about cloning and biological manipulation, her name resurfaced through the voice of a child connected to Port Charles's most fragile bloodlines. It wasn't just Rocco's question that haunted her. It was the silence from Britt, the aching void where her daughter's voice used to be. Liesel had long suspected that Dalton's research, once confined to theoretical boundaries, had crossed into monstrous territory. His early work in genome sequencing had been controversial enough, but the recent leaks suggested something far darker. Unauthorized experimentation on embryos, manipulation of inherited neurological conditions, and the rumored use of unidentified donor lines, with deep ties to criminal and mob-associated genetics. As a former doctor and mother to a child whose DNA could be both a blessing and a curse, Liesel's instincts were screaming. Dalton wasn't just tampering with nature, he was manufacturing it. And if Britt was somehow connected to that network, she wasn't just in danger. She was possibly complicit. Back in Port Charles, Willow began exhibiting erratic behavior, small at first, easily dismissed. Missed appointments. Sudden bursts of emotion. Nervous glances at the mention of Jason. Her reactions were laced with unease, especially whenever anyone brought up Britt or Dalton. Liesel, watching closely, noticed what others overlooked, a pattern. Willow, normally poised and composed, began avoiding specific topics with a precision that felt calculated. She flinched when Jason's name was mentioned in passing. She changed the subject when Britt was brought up, even deflecting with half-truths or sudden excuses. And Liesel, no stranger to guilt or secrets, recognized the symptoms for what they were, fear and suppression. What gnawed at Liesel most was a growing suspicion that Willow knew more about Britt's disappearance than she let on. There had been rumors, years ago, that Willow had once crossed paths with someone fitting Britt's description at a long-forgotten clinic outside of New Hampshire, a place known for its discretion and lack of medical records. Back then, the story was dismissed as misidentification. Now, Liesel wasn't so sure. And when she finally confronted Nina with her unease, weaving together Rocco's email, Willow's evasiveness, and the Dalton investigation, she saw something in Nina's face that confirmed her worst fear: the truth was unraveling. During a quiet conversation between the three women, Liesel mentioned Britt's name. It was an offhand comment, cloaked as a reflection, but its impact on Willow was immediate. Her face froze, not with confusion or grief, but dread. Her eyes widened just enough to betray recognition, then narrowed in panic. For a moment, she stopped breathing, and Liesel caught it, a flicker of guilt that couldn't be masked by tears or platitudes. Willow tried to recover, muttering something vague, but the room had already shifted. Nina looked from Liesel to Willow, her instincts catching up far too late. Liesel leaned back, her expression unreadable. But inside, her mind was racing. If Willow knew the truth, what was she protecting? Had she helped Britt disappear? Had she seen something she wasn't supposed to during Drew's rise to power, something tied to Dalton's research, something involving a child, or worse, Jason himself? And why was Willow so terrified of revisiting Jason's death? The way she recoiled from the topic suggested more than trauma, it suggested a secret, perhaps one she had been coerced into keeping. A deal? A cover-up? Liesel knew she had to proceed carefully. The shadows surrounding Dalton's operation were thick with deception, and one misstep could cost her the only chance she had at finding Britt, or understanding what role her daughter might be playing in a much larger game. She began compiling files, matching timelines, interviewing former patients and doctors at fringe clinics, tapping into old WSB databases she still had access to. If Britt was alive, if she had been hiding under the protection of Dalton's resources, then someone powerful wanted it that way. And that someone was terrified the truth might come out. But Liesel Albrecht had never been easily intimidated. She had watched her daughter suffer at the hands of liars and manipulators. She had once allied with monsters to keep her family safe. Now, faced with the possibility that Britt was alive, and possibly raising a child in secret, Liesel would not rest until every veil of secrecy was torn away. Because if there was one thing more dangerous than Dalton's experiments or Willow's hidden knowledge, it was the love of a mother determined to reclaim what was taken from her. And this time, she wouldn't fail. Jason's journey to uncover the truth had been long, perilous, and soaked in the echoes of his own past, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment it all came crashing into the present. The faint hum of an air conditioner, the creak of floorboards beneath his boots, the smell of sterilized cotton and something softer, talcum powder, maybe baby lotion, all surrounded him as he stepped into that anonymous apartment at the edge of Port Charles. Everything about the space felt, paused, suspended in a reality that didn't belong to him. But the woman who stepped out of the shadows did. Britt stood there, pale, thinner than he remembered, but no less powerful in her presence. And in her arms, bundled in a navy blue blanket with tiny silver constellations embroidered across it, was a boy. He looked up, wide-eyed, quiet, with an alertness beyond his years. It was the eyes that knocked the wind from Jason's lungs. Steel gray, sharp, watchful. His eyes. The child didn't cry. He just blinked slowly, processing Jason's towering form like he already knew this man somehow belonged in his world. Jason's gun had long since lowered, forgotten, hanging useless at his side. His breath caught in his throat, his muscles frozen in a cocktail of disbelief, awe, and something else he rarely felt, fear. The fear of understanding that his entire world had changed in the span of a heartbeat. That everything he thought he knew about loss, about Britt, about the price of love and sacrifice, had been rewritten. Britt didn't run, didn't flinch. But her eyes shimmered with tears unshed, her mouth trembling with truths too long buried. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Everything was there, in the way she held the boy tighter when Jason stepped closer, not in defense, but in reverence, as if preparing both herself and the child for the collision of fates that could no longer be avoided. Jason took one more step and stared at the boy. His son. Flesh and blood. A living, breathing symbol of a love that had been silenced by death, deception, and time. Jason knelt down slowly, his knees almost buckling as he lowered himself to eye level with the child. The boy reached out without hesitation, placing a small hand on Jason's chest. That touch, light as it was, unleashed something catastrophic within him. Years of hardened instinct, ruthless detachment, and emotional armor shattered under the innocent weight of that single gesture. He looked up at Britt then. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Why didn't she tell him? Why had she run? Why had she let him believe she was dead, let him mourn her, let him believe that he had once again lost the only light in a life filled with darkness? But even as the questions clawed at him, the answers were written all over her face: desperation, fear, love. She had done what she thought she had to. To protect their child. From the Quartermaines. From Carly. From the mob. From the world. The moment fractured when a sharp, unnatural beep echoed from a small device Britt had kept on the table, a silent alarm, discreet and military grade. Jason's eyes snapped to it. Movement. An alert. They had been found. Again. It happened fast. Too fast. The window shattered inward, and a man in black tactical gear rolled in behind a flash grenade. Jason acted on instinct, shielding Britt and the boy before the blast even faded. The intruder didn't shout. Didn't hesitate. He was here to kill. The boy was the target. Jason lunged, disarming the man in 2 moves, breaking his wrist with a brutal twist. The man didn't scream, trained, enhanced. Possibly drugged. The fight that followed was savage and silent. Blood spattered the walls. Britt screamed for Jason as he was thrown against the coffee table, but the look in Jason's eyes had changed. This wasn't a fight for survival. It was a declaration of war. He killed the attacker with his bare hands. The man's body dropped to the floor with a sickening thud, and Jason stood over him, panting, eyes wild. He wiped blood from his face as he turned to Britt and the boy, now huddled in the far corner of the room. He rushed to them, checking for injuries, touching the boy gently but urgently. No harm had come to them, not this time. But Jason knew better than to think it was over. This was only the beginning. In the silence that followed, Britt finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with guilt and grief. She explained everything. The night she found out she was pregnant. Her fear that Jason had died. Her decision to fake her death, aided by someone inside the WSB. Her contact with Dalton, who had offered protection in exchange for silence. Dalton had wanted access to her genetic background, curious about her ties to Liesel, Albrecht and Faison. When he learned about the baby, he became obsessed. Britt ran again. And again. Until Port Charles was the only place left to hide. Jason said nothing. He didn't need to. His resolve hardened with every word. Dalton had drawn a line in the sand, and now Jason would erase it in blood. The next morning, Jason destroyed all traces of their presence in that apartment. He set the place ablaze with thermite charges, erasing their location from the grid. They went underground, a safe house only Jason and Spinelli knew existed. Over the next few days, he planned. He observed. He made lists. Every name connected to Dalton. Every lab. Every operative. Every asset. One by one, he would dismantle them. Britt pleaded with him to wait, to be careful. But Jason wasn't just fighting for justice or revenge. He was fighting for something sacred. A chance to raise his son. To protect him. To be the father he never had, the father he'd always wanted to be, but never thought possible. And Britt, she was the mother of his child, the woman he had nearly died for, and would again. Jason contacted Sonny only once. Just enough to warn him not to interfere. This wasn't mob business. This was personal. And anyone, friend or foe, who stood between him and his family would be treated like a threat. He trained harder. Slept less. He held his son every night, memorizing his face, his laugh, the sound of his tiny breaths. He whispered silent promises while the child slept, vowing to build a future in the ashes of the one he had lost. A future worth killing for. Worth dying for.